The kind of wealth that trickled up into the marble pockets of Roman elites was staggering, almost cartoonish by today's standards. But it didn't fall from the sky. You're about to step into a world where wealth meant conquest, cruelty, and cold-blooded calculation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from your bed, I'd love to know your location and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up a dusty hill in the Italian countryside, your sandals sliding on gravel. To your left, a line of olive trees, pruned to perfection. To your right, sheep. So many sheep. And ahead, a villa, massive, ornate, its columns gleaming like ivory in the early sun. This is no weekend getaway. It's the beating heart of a latifundium, a sprawling estate owned by a Roman millionaire who doesn't even live here full-time. He might drop by once a season. Maybe. This estate is more business than home. It stretches over hundreds, even thousands of acres, usually cobbled together from seized land, bankrupt neighbors, or, more often, veterans who sold their plots for quick cash after years at war. You see, when soldiers were granted land as payment, many didn't have the strength or know-how to work it. Enter the opportunists, Roman elites who swooped in, offering lowball prices and empty promises. That's how these millionaires built their agricultural empires. One dusty handshake at a time. And the workers. Not local peasants. Slaves. Rows and rows of them. Imported from conquered lands, Gaul, Egypt, Judea, you name it. They live in crude quarters behind the grain silos. You walk past one, and the air shifts. The smell is different. Sweat. Smoke. Desperation. You don't make eye contact, even though one of them stares straight at you with a gaze that might have once belonged to a scholar or merchant back home. Historians still argue whether the massive use of slave labor was a cause of Rome's eventual economic decline, or simply a symptom of an already teetering system. And yet, the money poured in. Wheat, olives, grapes. Rome fed itself and taxed the rest of the empire with produce from these estates. Some landowners became so wealthy, they could influence Senate votes just by threatening a supply chain. That's not paranoia, that's logistics. You step into the cool atrium of the villa. It's got mosaic floors showing scenes of myth, Achilles, Hercules, Venus, but in weirdly flattering versions of the owner's own face. A bit narcissistic, sure, but not uncommon. Wealth in Rome wasn't just power. It was art, architecture, even acoustics. Some villas were designed so you could whisper in one room and be heard 3 rooms over. You know, just in case you wanted your guests to hear about how expensive your new fountain was without telling them directly. The landowners didn't stop with just one estate. Many held dozens. They'd plant crops in Sicily, herd sheep in Hispania, and press olives in Africa Proconsularis. The logistics were dizzying, but then again, so were the profits. Especially when you don't pay wages. That helps. And oh, the contracts. You follow one scribbled papyrus from a local tenant farmer, a colony, begging to rent a patch of land in exchange for a share of the harvest. If the weather's good, maybe he breaks even. If it's bad, he's in debt. For life. And guess who inherits that debt when he dies? Yep. His kids. It's a generational arrangement, like a very dusty and despair-filled subscription service. The latifundia became so vast that by the end of the Republic, a handful of Roman families owned more of Italy than the rest of the population combined. Sound familiar? It should. The growing gap between rich and poor wasn't just visible, it was baked into the very landscape. But here's a twist. Some landowners never even saw their estates. They managed them through freedmen and stewards, sending letters full of instructions and requests. These agents, often former slaves themselves, rose to positions of surprising authority. One letter even contains a scolding: "Do not let the overseers drink the good wine." That is for guests. Priorities. Now step outside with me. It's dusk. You smell roasted barley in the wind. Somewhere, a lyre plays a sleepy tune, and you look out over a land conquered not by sword, but by contract, owned not by birthright, but by relentless acquisition. This wasn't just farming. It was empire on a miniature scale, one estate at a time. And yet, here's the quirky bit, some of the wealthiest Roman landowners never touched dirt. They hated the countryside. They bought the land because it was profitable, but lived in cities, reading poetry, plotting politics, and bathing in imported milk. Land ownership was less about agriculture and more about aura, power, reputation. One senator, according to gossip, bought up a vineyard just so he could host a single drunken party in it, then let the whole thing rot. Because why not? When you're that rich, wasting resources becomes its own kind of flex. Still, whispers grew louder. Some reformers, like the Gracchi brothers, warned about land hoarding, inequality, and the hollowing of the Roman middle class. They proposed limits on land ownership and redistribution. You can probably guess how that went. Yep. Clubbed to death on the Senate floor. Twice. So when you trace the roots of Roman millionaire wealth, you find them not in markets or banks, but in acres. In land claimed, cleared, and quietly exploited. Where olive trees fed armies and vineyards padded bank accounts. And where every sunset over golden fields was a dividend. The horses smell like sweat, dust, and victory. You stand just outside the Pomerium, the sacred boundary of Rome proper, as a procession thunders past, rattling the cobblestones. Soldiers cheer, trumpets blare, and riding tall in a gleaming chariot is a general draped in a purple-trimmed toga, his face painted red like Jupiter himself. This is a Roman triumph, a parade for a conquering hero, and every moment of it smells like money. Because war, for many Roman elites, wasn't just glory. It was business. Big, bloody business. You follow the general, let's say he's someone like Lucullus or Pompey, back from the Eastern Front, dragging behind him a line of chained captives, exotic animals, and carts stuffed with treasure. Temples full of gold statues, jewel-encrusted armor, spice chests, ivory. You name it. This isn't just spoils of war. It's startup capital for an entire political career. And maybe a few villas. Roman generals, especially during the late Republic, were essentially freelance warlords. Their armies, funded partly out of pocket, partly by the Senate. Their rewards, whatever they could haul home. If you conquer a city, you're entitled to its wealth, at least, that's how the rules conveniently worked. And if you enslave the population, even better. Each living, breathing person you bring back can be sold at auction. One general supposedly returned from Hispania with 75,000 new slaves. Imagine the paperwork. You watch as a merchant carefully appraises a girl no older than 14, captured in Gaul. She's terrified. But to these millionaires, she's another investment, perhaps destined for a household, a vineyard, or worse. One ancient joke claimed war was just an extension of estate management. Charming. Historians still argue whether this economic dependency on warfare was sustainable, or if it accelerated Rome's spiral into corruption and civil strife. After all, when riches flow faster from conquest than commerce, why build when you can burn? And here's the kicker, a general didn't even need to win to get rich. Even a draw could come with perks, land grants, cash bonuses from allies, and of course, bribes from local kings looking to stay on Rome's good side. Take Lucullus again. He fought Mithridates for years, never quite captured him, but came home with enough loot to retire in ridiculous luxury. His dinner parties? Stuff of legend. Picture 100 peacocks roasted whole, each with a golden medallion tucked under its wing. Back in the city, you duck into a tavern near the Forum. A man whispers to you over a cup of sour wine, you know, some of those war deals? They never made the books. You nod. Under-the-table arrangements were everywhere, ransom payments, smuggled relics, protection fees. One crooked governor in Sicily was said to have stolen entire libraries and sent them back to Rome hidden inside wine barrels. Scholarly theft, the classiest of crimes. You pass through the Subura, the noisy, crammed neighborhood where ex-soldiers and freedmen rub shoulders, and where savvy millionaires quietly invest. The money from war doesn't just sit idle. It moves. Into property. Into shipping. Into bribes. One ex-general famously used his spoils to fund an entire gladiator school. Because nothing says legacy like shirtless men with swords. But here's a weird one. Some Roman generals became too rich. So rich that the Senate got nervous. When Scipio Aemilianus returned from razing Carthage, the Senate tried to downplay his triumph, fearing he'd get ideas. And Julius Caesar? Well, you know how that ended. One historian even called him a millionaire in a world not yet ready for billionaires. A little poetic, a little chilling. At the docks, you find another layer of the war money machine. Merchants swarm to buy discounted goods from returning generals. Spices, silks, rare animals. There's a booming market for strange pets among the upper class. Ever seen a peacock trained to scream a man's name? Neither had anyone else, until Crassus paid for it. But not all war profits came in shiny coins or gaudy pets. You enter a quiet office near the Capitoline Hill, where papyrus rustles under the hands of a wealthy equestrian. He's reviewing legal claims, land seized during war, debts inherited from defeated nobles. Some Romans made fortunes not from the battlefield, but from the paper trail left behind. You glance at one document, a claim to a silver mine in Spain, taken over after the owner was executed. No charges. Just suspicion of rebellion. How convenient. Another deed shows an estate in Numidia granted by the Senate after a tribal chieftain was mysteriously murdered. The ink's still drying. Historians still debate whether these property grabs were officially sanctioned or just tolerated. Either way, the rich got richer, and the state, well, the state got louder columns and more statues of generals posing like demigods. And here's the fringe detail you probably didn't expect. Roman soldiers often looted intellectual property. Scrolls, manuscripts, religious texts. Some generals shipped home entire libraries from temples and palaces. Not to read, of course. Just to say they had them. It's like stealing someone's Spotify playlist and never pressing play. You climb a hill overlooking Rome as the sun dips low. Behind you, a temple's just been dedicated with gold stolen from a Syrian city. In front of you, the Palatine gleams with fresh marble. And beneath it all, a city humming with wealth, much of it pulled from the ruins of someone else's. But it's not just greed. It's a system. Built on conquest, fed by ambition, and wrapped in legal robes so it looked noble. You don't need a factory when you have a legion. You don't need a business plan when the gods are on your side. And you certainly don't need permission when you have a sword. You head down the hill, past the bathhouses and forums, past statues of men who called themselves saviors but lived like kings. And you start to see it, every slab of stone, every chiseled column, every fountain bubbling in a city of 1 million people, was paid for in blood. You're standing in the atrium of a lavish Roman villa, staring at a wall-sized fresco of Hercules strangling a lion. But what catches your eye isn't the muscle-bound hero. It's the line of perfectly identical servants standing quietly to the side. You blink. They're not part of the painting. They are real. And they haven't moved. This is what wealth looks like in Rome, not just marble floors or peacock feather fans, but people. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of human beings serving a single household like breathing appliances. Because in this world, slaves aren't just labor. They are status. And Roman millionaires collected them the way modern billionaires collect Teslas, by the fleet. You glance at a young boy holding a silver tray so steadily it doesn't ripple the wine. He's 10. Maybe 11. Probably taken during a border raid or bought at a market near Ephesus. And his value? Well, that depends. A strong back costs less than a clever mind. A beautiful face more than both. A scribe who can read Greek. That's top shelf. A slave who can play the lyre and recite Homer. Now we're talking centerpiece. You wander deeper into the house. A man walks past in fine robes, not the master, but his steward, a trusted slave who manages accounts, land leases, crop schedules. This man can sign contracts. He might own other slaves himself. Some freedmen even lend money and run businesses for their masters, turning a profit from behind the scenes. It's upside-down logic, but very Roman. You see, slavery here isn't always a life sentence. Sometimes it's a ladder. Take Tiro, for instance, Cicero's slave secretary. He invented shorthand, published his master's speeches. When freed, he became a wealthy man in his own right. Or Narcissus, freedman of Emperor Claudius, who ended up controlling more imperial paperwork than half the Senate. Historians still argue whether these freed men had genuine power, or if they were just tools with fancy titles. Depends on who's telling the story. But not everyone gets a happy ending. You pass a storeroom where two slaves are chained at the ankles, one coughing, the other just staring at the floor. Maybe they spilled wine. Maybe they tried to run. Roman law allowed brutal punishment, even death. And while some owners were kind, or at least business savvy enough to preserve their investment, others didn't bother. One noblewoman reportedly had her cook flayed alive for burning a fish. And the worst part, her guests still stayed for dessert. And here's the creepy bit. Rich Romans didn't just own slaves. They showed them off. At dinner parties, hosts would parade their most exotic slaves, tall Numidians, blonde Germans, Persians with tattoos. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about domination. Imagine bragging about your wine list, but instead of Bordeaux, it's my Thracian with a talent for juggling. That's Rome. You pass a young girl arranging scrolls in a home library. She speaks 3 languages. She's maybe 13. And she's probably already smarter than half the guests arriving tonight. Some millionaires use slaves like human apps, each one trained for a specific function. Need a chef who knows Egyptian sauces? Covered. Someone to quote Plato? Absolutely. Someone to impersonate your neighbor's accent for a joke? Got it. Quirky detail incoming. Some Roman elites had slaves called nomenclators whose entire job was to whisper the names and bias of people they bumped into. Like a living LinkedIn assistant. You'd walk through the forum, and your slave would murmur, "That's Lucius Cornelius, grain dealer, divorced twice, owes you 300 sesterces." Honestly, kinda useful. And then there's the delici, literally delights. These were child slaves kept not for work, but for decoration. Dressed in silks, perfumed, paraded like living dolls. Uncomfortable yet? Good. You should be. The Roman elite viewed people as props. If your hallway didn't echo with obedient footsteps, were you even really wealthy? You step outside into the garden. A slave trims the hedge into the shape of a griffin. Another sprinkles rosewater into the air. The opulence is overwhelming, but underneath it all is a churning system of forced labor. From the kitchens to the libraries, from the vineyards to the mines, the Roman economy runs on backs that never get a day off. And yet, slaves were also integral to innovation. Skilled artisans, engineers, even physicians were often enslaved. A rich Roman might own a Greek doctor, a Syrian architect, and an African mosaic artist, all under one roof. Sometimes, their talents elevated the entire household. One scholar slave named Epictetus became a philosopher whose ideas still echo today. Irony much. But remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier times? Well, guess who had to apply it? That's right, the slaves. Sometimes 2 or 3, depending on how sunburn paranoid their master was. And don't even ask who tested it first. You overhear a conversation between 2 guests at tonight's dinner party. One boasts about his new cook, imported at enormous cost. The other raises an eyebrow and replies, "Yes, but mine sings while he bastes the lamb." The arms race never ends. Some millionaires were known to lease out their slaves like Uber drivers. Need a chef for one night? Or a flute player for a funeral? Hire a human being by the hour. It's disturbing, yes, but it also shows how completely commodified human life had become. You weren't a person. You were potential revenue. One final twist. Some slaves became so valuable that they had their own financial accounts. Legally, everything a slave owned belonged to their master, but in practice, many wealthy slaves accumulated personal stashes, often to one day buy their freedom. Imagine saving your tips for 20 years, while managing a mansion. And when they did buy their freedom, some became rich themselves. They entered the world of freedmen, a class of ex-slaves who could now own property, run businesses, even serve in imperial offices, though never quite shedding the stain of their past. Think of it as climbing a social ladder where every rung is greased with olive oil, imported and taxed. You walk out through the villa gate, the garden still fragrant behind you, the laughter of masters mixing with the quiet shuffle of servants. The air feels heavy, because in Rome, behind every polished marble column stands a dozen invisible hands keeping it upright. Some whisper, some sing, most stay silent. But without them, the empire would crumble by morning. You step into the bustling Forum Boreum, Rome's oldest market, and immediately your nose is assaulted by a cocktail of fish guts, garlic, roasting nuts, and, somehow, goat. Just goat. You're not sure where it's coming from, but it's always there. And right at the edge of this fragrant chaos, you find the real money. Commerce, contracts, and people who never lifted a sword yet owned half the empire. Because as it turns out, you didn't have to conquer a province to become a millionaire in ancient Rome. You could just lease one. Enter the publicani, Rome's official tax farmers. You squint and spot one now, pacing in front of a stall selling smoked eels, clutching a wax tablet, muttering about quotas. He looks stressed, and he should. His company just bought the rights to collect taxes from a province in Asia Minor. Bought. As in, he paid the government a lump sum up front for the privilege of squeezing money out of foreign peasants. Everything he collects above that? Pure profit. It's a system so open to abuse it practically begs for corruption. Want to demand double the tax and pocket the difference? Sure. Who's going to stop you? The local governor, who's also getting a cut. Historians still argue whether this privatized tax model saved the Roman treasury or bled the provinces dry like overripe grapes. You pass a marble bench where two men haggle over grain prices. Both are wearing bright tunics, not togas. That's your hint. These aren't senators. They're equestrians, members of Rome's wealthy business class. Not allowed to serve in high politics, but free to make ungodly amounts of money. If the senators were the face of Rome, these guys were its wallet. They invest in shipping, mines, slave markets, even construction contracts. The Colosseum, funded partly by the spoils of war, but also by contractors looking to impress the emperor. Some of them bid ridiculously low to win the job, only to sneak in costs later. Sound familiar? One particularly ambitious equestrian, let's call him Gaius the Gutsy, made his fortune by managing funeral services. He figured out that grieving families were willing to pay obscene amounts for proper rites. So he packaged cremations with luxury urns, choir bores, and even actors who'd cry on cue. It was the Roman version of a deluxe burial package, sadness sold by the pound. And here's the quirky bit. Roman millionaires often invested in urine. Yes, really. You stop by a public latrine where a young boy stirs a large clay jar with a long stick. That's because human urine, rich in ammonia, was essential for tanning leather and laundering togas. And someone had to collect it, bottle it, and sell it. The Emperor Vespasian even taxed it, leading to the delightful phrase, pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink. Debate still swirls about how widespread this trade was, but let's just say some of the richest Romans owed their fortune to pee. You duck into a shady arcade filled with coin changers. It's loud, tense, and smells faintly metallic. You watch a moneylender count out interest from a loan made to a shipping captain. Interest rates? They ranged from modest to daylight robbery. And if a borrower defaulted? Let's just say the recovery process sometimes involved a man with a stick and no patience. And it wasn't just money lending. Wealthy Romans loved investing in maritime ventures, especially risky ones. A grain ship to Alexandria? Dangerous. Sure. Pirates, storms, sea monsters, the usual. But if it landed, you doubled your money. Triple, if you hedged your risk by investing in several ships. Modern venture capital? Meet ancient venture novelties. You wander into a warehouse near the Tiber. Inside, crates of spices, textiles, and weirdly specific statues of dolphins. Each item has passed through dozens of hands, freedmen, merchants, dock workers. And somewhere near the top of that pyramid sits a quiet millionaire who never broke a sweat. He just owned the warehouse. Maybe the boats, too. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. Occasionally, the state would step in and demand a contribution. Rich merchants might be pressured to donate grain during shortages, or lend money to the treasury voluntarily. Refuse? Risk exile, or worse, creative taxation. One senator's garden was classified as agricultural land, so the state could tax it as a farm. He tried to fight it. Lost. Historians still argue whether these pressures led to the decline of entrepreneurial spirit or simply separated the clever from the cowardly. After all, those who adapted kept winning. One merchant started selling fireproof oil lamps after a string of urban fires. Another sold miracle bread to plague survivors. Capitalism, Roman style, fast, brutal, opportunistic. Back at the Forum, you watch a group of sharply dressed equestrians argue over trade routes. One's pushing for a new road through Gaul. Another insists Egypt is the future. They bicker like modern tech bros at a pitch meeting. Except their apps are olive oil and marble. And remember that friend of a friend who invested in funerals? Well, he now owns a gladiator school. Why? Because death is recession-proof. You can sell the show, sell the blooded sand, sell the broken weapons as souvenirs. And if a fighter survives long enough, you can rent him out like a prize stallion. You pause by a bakery that smells like heaven, or maybe just toasted sesame. The owner, a former slave turned multiloaf tycoon, sells to both nobles and commoners. His trick? Vertical integration. He owns the grain mill, the ovens, and the delivery boys. He's basically the Bezos of bread. And here's the fringe detail for this one. Some wealthy Romans invested in paranormal services. Fortune tellers, dream interpreters, curse tablets. One woman made a killing selling protective amulets during an eclipse panic. You watch as a customer pays 3 silver coins for a charm made from bat wings and bronze wire. Does it work? Probably not. But it feels like it might. And that's priceless. As the sun dips behind the temples, casting long shadows over the marketplace, you finally start to see the pattern. Roman millionaires made their fortunes not just through conquest or cruelty, but through calculation. They saw opportunities where others saw risk. They turned sewage into silver, superstition into business models, and suffering into supply chains. You turn a corner and nearly trip over a man shouting about a fresh shipment of saffron. It's chaos, all of it. And yet, underneath the shouting and sweating, a quiet truth hums. The Roman economy, for all its mess and madness, was a playground for those who knew the rules, and weren't afraid to break them. You drift into the bustling heart of Rome, your sandals tapping across uneven cobblestones as you pass row after row of towering, brick and plaster insulae, Rome's apartment blocks. These buildings loom overhead like ancient skyscrapers, some of them 5, even 6 stories high. But don't be fooled by the grandeur from below. The rich don't live up there. No, those drafty upper floors are for the poor, crammed with entire families and chamber pots. You're heading toward the ground floor, where the landlords rake in their denarii without ever having to lift a finger or replace a leaky roof. Because tonight, you're a Roman property mogul. You own buildings that span from Subura's slums to the wide porticos near the Forum. You've got tenants by the hundreds. Some are merchants. Some are workers. Some just need a place to sleep that isn't a back alley. You don't know their names, and you don't care to. You've got your estate manager for that, a freedman who handles the daily headaches while you sip watered wine on your villa's veranda in Campania. The Roman real estate scene is absurdly profitable. Why? Because there are virtually no regulations. You buy cheap land on the city's edge or snap up old tenements, and then you cram in as many people as possible. Plumbing? Optional. Structural integrity? Let's just say that historians still argue whether the collapse of Insulae was more due to bad engineering or pure greed. Fires are common. So are falling ceilings. But as long as the rent arrives, weekly and in cash, you don't flinch. You'd think that with such risks, rich Romans would avoid this market. But no, property is the ultimate power flex. Owning land, even urban land, is tied to status. Just walking past your own building while wearing your senator's striped toga can earn you nods. You hear someone say, "That's his block, over 200 tenants, all paying him." And that's better than a statue in the forum. The urban poor pay dearly to live in your buildings. Some rent single rooms with no heat and communal toilets that are basically holes in the floor. Others pay to squat in shops by day and sleep on the same cold marble by night. And every denarius they hand over goes into your growing portfolio. Still, not all your profits come from city apartments. Rural villas are where the deep money lives. You've got olive groves, vineyards, wheat fields, spread across acres of Italy's most fertile land. You don't farm it yourself, of course. That's what your slaves are for. And your steward? He's constantly writing letters on wax tablets, reporting on yields, thefts, and local disputes. Once a year, you'll visit the estate in person, not to work, but to be adored by local townsfolk who depend on your jobs and fear your wrath. And then there's the passive cash cow, the rental villa. Nestled near the coast or in the breezy hills, these are leased to fellow elites needing a vacation from Rome's grime. They'll pay generously for a month or two of clean air, rustic charm, and hot baths. You rarely need to advertise. A few whispered recommendations at a dinner party and suddenly 3 senators are bidding on your Etruscan getaway. But the real estate game doesn't end with land. You've got a piece of the port too. Warehouses near Ostia. Those make bank. Merchants need dry, guarded places to store their imports, especially wine, oil, and exotic animals bound for the arena. And every crate stashed in your space earns you coin. You're not just a landlord, you're infrastructure. Logistics. Essential. You tell yourself this as you count another set of wax tablet receipts. And here's a quirky little corner of the market. Tomb plots. That's right. Even in death, Romans have real estate needs. You've acquired a strip of land just outside the city's sacred boundary, the Pomerium. Why? Because people will pay a small fortune to be buried where others can see their final message carved in stone. You lease those spots by the foot, and suddenly even a funeral becomes a revenue stream. Still, the real estate bubble isn't without its weirdness. You know of one millionaire who built a luxury villa underground. Total darkness. Frescoes of stars on the ceilings. Why? Because he hated the sun. Or maybe his astrologer told him to. Either way, he sunk thousands of sesterces into a property no one else would ever see. And when he died, his heirs sold it to a neighbor who used it to store wine. Back in the city, you check on one of your newest acquisitions. A partially collapsed insula that you picked up for cheap after a minor earthquake. You plan to rebuild just enough to collect rent again. Safety codes? Not your problem. And you might bribe a city official or two to fast-track your rebuilding permit, assuming they haven't already gotten their cut in advance. It's all part of the business. Now, remember that whole Roman moral code about wealth needing to come from the land? Well, here's the wink. Land in the city technically counts. So while senators pretend they're too noble for commerce, they're still snapping up rental blocks faster than a merchant can say lease agreement. It's a hypocrite's game, and you play it better than most. And yet, the wealthiest landlords know to stay quiet. The loudest ones tend to attract attention and taxes. So you build your fortune in bricks, but your public persona in modesty. At least, until your funeral, when your will can finally brag for you. You recline in your atrium now, surrounded by frescoes of pastoral bliss, scenes of sheep, shepherds, and rolling fields. It's ironic, considering you haven't seen a sheep in years. But the illusion matters. It says you're connected to the land, even if your money comes from overcrowded stairwells and leaking roofs. And just before you drift off for a nap, your steward appears with news. Your newest tenant is a freedman silk trader with 3 daughters and a dog. They've taken the second-floor unit near the bakery. You nod. Another family nestled into your empire, another drip in your golden bucket. You're no longer standing on Roman soil, you're swaying on the deck of a cargo ship, somewhere between Carthage and Ostia. The smell of brine mixes with olive oil and anxiety. Around you, amphorae clink like nervous teeth, fragile containers holding fortunes in fermented grape juice and golden oil. Tonight, you're not a senator or landlord. You're a merchant millionaire, chasing riches across the sea in a business where one bad storm, or one hungry pirate crew, could reduce your empire to salty splinters. Wine and olive oil are more than just Roman table staples. They're liquid currency. From Hispania to Judea, people are thirsty, hungry, and willing to pay. If you've got the trade routes, the storage capacity, and a few well-placed bribes at customs, you can turn humble produce into untouchable wealth. But first, you have to survive the journey. You close your eyes and picture your estate back home, the vines lined in neat, obedient rows, kissed by the sun, picked by exhausted slaves who start before dawn. Historians still argue whether those estates were truly as efficient as the ancient authors boasted, or if the numbers were heavily cooked to make elite landowners feel better about their monoculture obsessions. Either way, you've diversified. You don't just grow wine, you move it. Your operation spans continents. In Hispania, your overseers manage oil production in dusty, wind-blasted groves. In Gaul, they bottle wine in ceramic amphorae stamped with your personal seal, a stylized dolphin. Because dolphins, oddly enough, are the unofficial mascots of Roman commerce. And your ships? They're crewed by hardened sailors who know when to offer sacrifices to Neptune and when to toss a decoy crate overboard to distract pirates. Speaking of pirates, you once had an entire ship disappear near Sicily. Was it a storm? Sabotage? Sea raiders? You never found out. One morning it was on the manifest, and by nightfall it was gone. Just a long silence and some very expensive oil at the bottom of the sea. That's the game. Some win, some sink. To hedge your risks, you've invested in a syndicate. Sort of an ancient insurance policy. Several traders pool funds to back one large shipment. If it arrives, profit. If it doesn't, you all take the hit, together. It's not a perfect system, but it beats losing everything every time Neptune sneezes. You've also mastered the art of rebranding. That sour Etrurian wine, aged a few months longer and sold to unsuspecting Britons as vintage import. Those amphorae-stamped A-grade oil, slightly watered down, but sold in Alexandria as premium metallic luxury. The Romans didn't have trademark laws. Your charm, your connections, and a few choice exaggerations go a long way. Now step inside your warehouse in Ostia. Rows and rows of amphorae stacked like soldiers. You run your fingers over the wax seals, listening to your steward read off the inventories. 20 jars of Falernian, marked for Senator Claudiu's banquet. 50 crates of oil, scheduled for the bathhouses of Baiae. Each order means more silver in your strongbox and more clout in your social circles. But wine and oil aren't your only plays. You dabble in garum, Rome's favorite fermented fish sauce. Think soy sauce, but fishier. Far fishier. Entire factories of slaves crush fish guts into clay vats, letting them rot into a briny sludge that, believe it or not, elite Romans sprinkle on everything. It smells like Neptune's armpit, but it sells better than perfume. You once made a deal to export 10 jars to a senator's villa in Narbo. He threw a feast, served garum on boiled dormice, and you were suddenly the flavor mogul of southern Gaul. And let's not forget ceramics. The containers themselves, those classic amphorae with pointy bottoms, are valuable too. You've got artisans cranking out amphora after amphora, each stamped with your seal. You're not just shipping wine. You're branding it. One dolphin-stamped amphora dumped in a rubbish heap in Britannia. Free advertising. But shipping isn't just about moving goods. It's about moving reputation. You fund public port projects, partly out of civic pride, mostly to ensure your ships dock first. You might even donate a few marble benches to the Ostian Harbour Temple. Inscribed, of course, from Gaius, purveyor of fine Falernian and olive oil. Subtle, but effective. At dinner parties, people ask where you get your wine. You smirk. Imported it myself. Pressed under the August sun. Aged beneath Etrurian oak. Truth is, the wine's decent, but it's your story they're drinking. And the risks? Well, they don't stop at the water's edge. Rome's market is volatile. A single bad harvest and prices skyrocket. Great if you're holding stock, terrible if you're buying late. And then there's the competition. Some upstart merchant just brought in cheaper oil from Mauritania. Tastes like lamp fuel but sells like liquid gold to people who don't know better. You'll have to undercut him, spread rumors, maybe bribe a food inspector to declare his batch unfit for consumption. Nothing personal, just trade. But your best bet? Overseas contracts. Provincial governors, despite their noble airs, are greedy for home comforts. You once outfitted an entire legion stationed in Judea with your wine. Half of it arrived spoiled. The other half arrived divine. You made a fortune. And thanks to your cousin's connections in the Senate, you snagged another 5-year contract. Steady income, endless shipments, and a monopoly in one dusty corner of the empire. There's a phrase that floats among Rome's trade elite: who controls the oil, controls the kitchen. Who controls the wine, controls the feast. You control both. And maybe, someday, if fortune smiles, you'll marry your daughter to a senator, build a marble villa on the Palatine, and sip your own product while Rome toasts your name. Just try not to think about the last ship you lost, or the amphorae still bobbing somewhere out there on a moonlit sea. You sit on a carved stone bench in the cool atrium of your domus, running your fingers over a wax tablet. The symbols scratched into it aren't poetry or love notes, they're numbers. Interest rates. Promissory loans. Property debts. It's not flashy like wine or war spoils, but tonight, you're slipping into the quiet, lucrative world of Roman finance. A world without banks, but with plenty of money. Rome, you discover, has no Bank of Italy, no credit unions, no gleaming financial skyscrapers. And yet, somehow, everyone is borrowing, lending, investing. It all runs on trust, documentation, and the occasional thug for hire when trust breaks down. You, of course, are not the thug. You're the lender. The one who provides the sesterces when someone needs to buy a vineyard, or bribe a magistrate, or recover from a shipping disaster. And how do you get into this game? Easy. You start with wealth, land, trade profits, or inheritances, and you diversify. You lend. At rates that hover between 6 and 12%, depending on how desperate the borrower is. More, if you're especially ruthless. Usury laws exist, sure, but they're soft suggestions more than hard rules. Historians still argue whether elite Romans even followed them or just paid off the enforcers and charged what they liked. You do most of your business through intermediaries, freedmen who front the money, collect payments, and make a show of being approachable. This way, your social reputation stays clean. After all, direct moneylending is considered a bit tacky for someone of your class. But indirect moneylending? Quietly profitable. Invisibly powerful. There's no paper trail like modern banking, so everything hinges on documentation, wax tablets, sealed and witnessed. Some lenders even hire scribes to create duplicates, kept in separate locations, in case the original gets mysteriously eaten by fire, or rats, or conveniently dishonest debtors. Speaking of which, you learn quickly that lending is as much psychology as arithmetic. One debtor boasts too loudly about a new villa, time to raise his interest rate. Another suddenly grows pious and retreats to a monastery in Bali, he's probably fleeing his debts. Better send a few polite letters, or a big ex-gladiator with no neck. And yet, risk breeds creativity. You start using a clever tool, the nomina. This is a kind of IOU, a promissory note that can be passed around like currency. You lend to someone, and instead of collecting cash, you sell their debt to another investor, sometimes at a discount, sometimes for favors. It's ancient debt trading. If you're clever, you can make money without ever seeing a coin. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some wealthy Romans stored their cash not in vaults, but buried in sealed amphorae in their gardens, labeled with nothing but cryptic symbols. A few of these hoards have been found centuries later, coins still inside, untouched, because their owners never came back. Whether from sudden death, betrayal, or a particularly successful disappearing act, who knows? You chuckle at the thought. Your own emergency funds are stored more elegantly, in a strong box, behind a mosaic panel, guarded by a particularly ugly statue of Hercules. No one ever checks behind Hercules. Too much muscle, not enough charm. Now imagine a typical day. A man arrives, say, a merchant just back from Alexandria. He's short on cash but has a promising new cargo of papyrus scrolls. He needs 10,000 sesterces to bribe port officials and hire laborers. He offers you a share of future profits. You weigh the risk. The papyrus market is strong right now. Senators love a good Greek tragedy. You agree. The man kisses your hand, signs the tablet, and leaves. If he profits, you profit more. If he fails, well, the port authority knows how to apply pressure. But not all lending is commercial. Some of it is deeply personal. A noblewoman might borrow discreetly to cover gambling debts. A young senator needs funds for an upcoming campaign. Votes aren't free, after all. You lend quietly, then influence loudly. Every loan is a potential favor. Every favor is a future lever. The cleverest part? When you start issuing loans not just in Rome, but in the provinces. Through letters, trusted agents, and shipping networks, you fund merchants in Carthage, villa upgrades in Gaul, even gladiator schools in the East. You've never seen half these places, but your money has. You're global. And your return on investment is higher than ever. Sometimes, you gamble. You fund a new bathhouse, hoping the developer finishes before the local well dries up. Or you back an inventor with a new kind of water wheel. It's loud, clunky, and scares horses, but if it works, you'll be the first to license it across Etruria. One loan at a time, you become a quiet kingmaker. Of course, lending has its nightmares. You once backed a startup bakery, great bread, terrible business sense. The owner fled to Dacia, leaving you with a building full of moldy grain and a very confused cat. You sold it off for scrap. Lesson learned. Still, your best debtors are repeat customers. You give them good terms, they bring friends. Soon, your name whispers through the markets like a minor deity. Need funding? Try Gaius. Quiet, discreet, fair, and less crossed. And the Senate? Some pretend to despise financiers. But behind closed doors, even they borrow. Just for a short time, they say, adjusting their golden rings. Just until the estate sells. You nod. You loan. You raise the rate. Because nobility, in debt, pays better than peasants in full. You recline now, a scroll of ledgers in one hand, a honey cake in the other. You've made more from lending than from land. More from interest than from olives. And you've never sailed a ship, commanded a legion, or lifted a shovel. Just numbers. Just promises. Just pressure, applied with the softest touch. And as the sun sets over Rome, casting long shadows across your atrium, you whisper to no one in particular, banking without banks? Works just fine. You walk slowly through a grand marble colonnade, the kind that echoes with every soft step. Around you, everything whispers restraint, columns evenly spaced, statues modest, a few benches with elegant floral carvings. And yet, beneath all that tasteful stone lies one of Rome's most profitable lies: senators pretending they're above business. Tonight, you slip behind the curtain and watch how the Republic's most virtuous men built secret fortunes while wagging their fingers at everyone else. According to Roman law, specifically, the Lex Claudia, senators aren't supposed to dabble in large-scale commerce. No ships, no trade deals, no cut of merchant profits. Too grubby for the high-minded ideals of Rome's ruling class. Senators were expected to live off land, bask in civic virtue, and let others handle the messy business of making money. But here's the catch: they didn't follow their own rules. Not really. And you've become one of them. So how do you, an honorable senator with a perfectly respectable toga, rake in cash while technically obeying the letter of the law? You start by using equites, Rome's wealthy middle class, as your business fronts. You invest in ships, just not in your name. A trusted equestrian cousin owns the fleet. You, meanwhile, get a steady cut of profits from every amphora of Spanish oil it hauls. It's a system built on plausible deniability. Historians still argue whether some senators truly distanced themselves from trade or just became masters of paper-thin proxies. The evidence? Let's just say a suspicious number of senatorial villas were mysteriously funded right after their non-commercial relatives struck business gold. You sit in the Senate by day, nodding gravely as debates drag on about grain prices or eastern borders. But by night, you're checking shipping manifests, negotiating trade deals, and sending coded letters to your associates in Ostia. You're like a Roman Batman, but instead of fighting crime, you're co-owning a garum factory with suspiciously high margins. Sometimes, it's not just goods you traffic, it's information. You know which governor's recall is coming, or which province is about to erupt. That knowledge can make you very rich, very quietly. You might sell off shares in a risky venture before the public hears the bad news. Or you might buy up property in a soon-to-be lucrative port before the Senate even votes on the expansion plan. You've even got investments in gladiator schools, again, not in your name, but everyone in the know knows. The money flows from a shadowy line of connections. A cousin of your wife's steward funds the school turns a profit, and somehow, your garden starts blooming with imported roses in February. Coincidence? Sure. The real trick is balancing optics. You throw public games, donate a new fountain, maybe fund a small temple to Mercury, patron god of commerce. How ironic. The people see generosity. They don't see the ledger. And those Senate speeches you give? Full of disdain for greedy merchants, warnings about foreign influence, and calls to preserve Roman dignity. All while your business interests quietly extend from Gaul to Arabia. You're a moralist by day, and a shipping magnate by night. Here's a particularly quirky case. Lucius Cornelius Balbus, a wealthy figure from Gades, managed to become an honorary Roman senator despite being from outside Italy. How? By aligning himself with Caesar and piling up influence. While not every senator was quite so flexible with the rules, the message was clear: power plus profit equals privilege, no matter where you're from. One of your more profitable side hustles? Renting mules to the military. Yes, mules. When legions march, they need beasts of burden, and someone has to provide them. Through a company run by a former client of yours, you've supplied hundreds of mules for Eastern campaigns. It's not glamorous, but each hoof step jingles with denarii. And it's completely legal, because the invoice doesn't have your name on it. And then there's the marble. You invested in a small quarry in Luna, known for pale, almost luminescent stone. It's not much, just a side deal. But when a public building needs new columns, guess whose marble gets picked? Yours. And you act surprised every time. Of course, This secret wealth has its dangers. One senator, too bold, too rich, found himself accused of illegal profiteering. His estate was investigated. He protested, claiming innocence. But the tablets told the truth. They always do. His fall was swift and public. You watched from your seat in the curia, expression neutral, while quietly removing his name from your guest list. Still, the rewards outweigh the risks. Your children grow up with Greek tutors. Your garden boasts Egyptian lotus ponds. Your villa has imported Spanish mosaics, sea creatures frolicking beneath your feet while slaves bring you chilled melon. None of that comes from farming alone. And sometimes you host banquets, carefully modest, but just opulent enough. A few salted peacock-tongues, a harpist in the corner, some expensive Syrian wine that accidentally found its way into your cellar. Your fellow senators nod approvingly. They suspect, but they don't ask, because they're doing the same thing. You once overheard a fellow senator chuckle between sips. The Republic frowns on trade, unless it's your cousin doing it for you. Everyone laughed, because it was true. You stretch now, reclining on your couch, gazing up at a ceiling fresco of Mercury soaring above the seas. He's holding a purse and wearing winged sandals. You smirk. Mercury, the god of commerce, keeps your secrets. And as the oil lamps flicker low, you reflect on your position. You're a senator, a landowner, a businessman in disguise. Your power isn't just in votes or oratory. It's in ships you don't own, deals you didn't sign, and fortunes you never officially earned. Because in Rome, true wealth doesn't shout. It whispers, behind marble walls. You're seated on a stone bench deep in the shadow of the Colosseum, the air thick with the smell of grilled meat, sweat, and something vaguely metallic, maybe blood, maybe iron-scrubbed coins. The crowd is already pouring in, eager for a day of lions, tigers, and sponsorships. Because tonight, you're not just watching gladiators, you're Monetizing them. You've joined a select class of Roman millionaires who turned public entertainment into private enterprise. The Colosseum, that grand arena of gore and cheers, isn't just a symbol of imperial power, it's a marketplace. And you, dear Roman, are about to make a killing, quite literally, in the arena economy. First, meet your investment, Marcus the Thracian, a gladiator you purchased 2 years ago. Not cheap. He came with a broken nose and a reputation for surviving impossible odds. You trained him, branded him, and promoted him like a modern sports team might market their MVP. He's now a minor celebrity, known for spinning his blade before a strike and for always sparing opponents who beg with flair. The crowd eats it up. And they pay for it, indirectly, of course. Your name is printed, well, painted, on amphorae of watered wine sold at the games, from the cellars of Gaius, sponsor of the undefeated Marcus. You sell souvenir figurines, tiny, muscular statues of your man mid-swing, sword raised dramatically. They go fast, especially among teenage fans who carve his name into wooden school tablets. See, Roman blood sport isn't just violence, it's marketing. You sponsor a few games, cover the cost of animals or fighters, and in return, your name is announced between matches. Today's games brought to you by Gaius, purveyor of fine wool and finer warriors. The crowd cheers. You wave modestly from your shaded seat. And later, your shops get a bump in traffic. Even your cheap tunics start flying off shelves. There's real money in the merch. Food stalls within spitting distance of the arena sell roasted dormice and honey cakes, all with your mark. The more famous your fighter, the more you can charge vendors to rent a corner of the walkway. It's franchising, ancient style. One merchant even asked to name a sausage after Marcus. You agreed. It sold out. But the money goes beyond snacks. Let's talk betting. Technically, it's not state-approved. Realistically, it's Rome's worst-kept secret. Wagers fly with every clang of a gladius. You quietly fund a few betting agents, men who set odds, collect bets, and pay out, or don't. When Marcus fights, you always know the spread. Sometimes you bet on him. Other times, if he's tired or injured, you bet against him and cash in when he loses with a theatrical collapse. Historians still argue whether some matches were rigged. Some say no self-respecting Lannister, gladiator trainer, would risk a champion's life for a scripted show. Others point to conveniently timed wins, crowd-pleasing accidental draws, and suspicious last-minute substitutions. Either way, you've seen enough to know that sometimes a little pre-fight whisper goes a long way. Speaking of Lannister, you're considering buying your own ludus, a gladiator school. It's not just about training fighters. It's real estate, marketing, and labor control in one bloody bundle. You get the rookies, train them for months, and rent them out for games across the empire. Some die, sure, but the best? They win, rise, and sell merchandise. One even appeared in a pantomime reenacting his own greatest battle. Bit dramatic, but it filled the theater. And then there are the animals. You're part owner in a beast supplier. Yes, that's a job. Your associate imports panthers from North Africa, bears from Dacia, and ostriches from who knows where. They arrive terrified and caged, destined to fight or be slaughtered for the thrill of the crowd. You get a share of every beast bought by a magistrate looking to impress the masses. Bonus if it eats a criminal in a particularly artistic way. Sometimes, though, the games are more about politics than profit. You're asked to sponsor a set of matches in honor of a retiring general or a local harvest festival. You pretend it's civic duty. But really, it's networking. You get to wine and dine magistrates, curry favor with priests, and wave at the emperor from a slightly too luxurious box seat. All while the crowd roars as two half-naked men swing tridents at each other. One particularly profitable angle? Renting out arena space during off-days. Weddings, executions, musical performances. If you know the right people, you can make passive income off the venue itself. Once, you even hosted a private birthday bash with gladiator-themed drinking games. A bit tacky, but lucrative. And let's not forget the gladiators themselves. Some get so famous they receive gifts, rings, tunics, even love letters from noblewomen. You intercept those, of course. Some you sell. Others you save. Once, you used a particularly juicy letter to blackmail a minor official into fast-tracking your bathhouse permit. Everyone wins. Except the official's pride. And the funerals? Ah yes. When a beloved gladiator dies, you cash in again. Memorial plaques, commemorative scrolls, even wax masks for fans to wear during the morning games. You sell sorrow by the unit. One senator commissioned a statue of his favorite fighter, life-sized, bronze, with sculpted abdominals so sharp they could injure a passerby. Of course, not all games go smoothly. You've had your fair share of fiascos. One event ended early when an elephant trampled two musicians. Another saw a lion escape into the stands. But as long as the crowd gets a thrill and the emperor nods approvingly, it's still a win. A dangerous, blood-soaked, logistically exhausting win, but a win. So here you are, reclining now in your marble-paved garden, sipping wine from a cup embossed with your gladiator's face. Somewhere, a group of boys is reenacting Marcus's last fight. Somewhere else, a baker is selling Marcus sausages at a markup. And in your storeroom, a fresh batch of amphorae, ready to be painted with the next champion's likeness. In Rome, even violence is Monetized. Especially violence. And you're profiting from every slash, stomp, and scream. You walk slowly through a marble hallway lined with torches and whispers. This is no market, no bathhouse, no gladiator school. It's the quiet battlefield of Roman power, where politics meets money and everyone has something to sell. Tonight, you're stepping into the real business of the Republic. Votes, favors, and a social game more cutthroat than any arena. You've traded in your merchant's tunic for a senator's toga. And unlike the sweaty chaos of the marketplace, this world runs on subtle glances, folded wax tablets, and handshakes that bind more tightly than any contract. Because if you want real wealth in Rome, the untouchable, dynastic kind, It comes not just from property or trade, but from power. And power is for sale. First stop, elections. They might look democratic, citizens voting in assemblies, names on ballots, but behind the scenes, it's all choreography. You fund a candidatus, maybe your son-in-law, maybe a business partner. You provide the sportula, the little gift baskets or coins handed out to voters. You pay for his tunic whitened with chalk, literally where the word candidate comes from. You hire actors to cheer his name in the forum. And if he wins, so do you. Historians still argue whether Rome's electoral system ever really worked on merit, or if it was always just elaborate theatre for the wealthy. You already know the answer. Every vote has a price. Every office is a long-term investment. And if you're running yourself, well, it's even pricier. You don't just buy votes, you buy optics. You throw games. You repair a road. You fund a new aqueduct. Not out of love for civic duty, but to flash your name across Rome in marble letters. The people might cheer your generosity, but what you're really buying is memory, influence, legacy. It's not just the people you need to sway. It's the other senators. You host dinner parties, lavish, but tastefully so. The wine flows. The oysters shimmer on silver platters. Between bites of honey-roasted dormice, deals are whispered. If you back my motion, I'll support your nephew's nomination. It's not corruption. It's networking, Roman style. Of course, some favors require a heavier purse. Need a favorable ruling in a court case? The right praetor can be persuaded. Want land reassigned or a contract awarded? Slip a gift to the scribe who drafts the decree. You never hand over the bribe yourself, of course. That's what freedmen are for. You keep your hands clean while your influence spreads like oil across marble floors. One of your more lucrative connections? A junior magistrate who oversees grain distribution. Officially, he ensures fair pricing. Unofficially, he tips you off when shortages loom. You buy low, wait for panic, then sell high. It's perfectly legal, technically, and wildly profitable. Then there's the social currency of your network, the amicitia system. Think of it like a web of favors, obligations, and silent expectations. You help someone's son secure a post in a distant province. 5 years later, he's back with a fortune, and a willingness to help your cousin avoid a lawsuit. Everyone wins. Eventually. And let's not forget the religious side of politics. You make a donation to a temple, and suddenly, you're honored with a ceremonial title. High priest of this or that. You don't actually perform the rites, that's for the flayman, but your name gets engraved next to the gods. Divine branding. You've even dabbled in the Senate's most delicate game, foreign affairs. You once funded an ambassador's trip to a minor Eastern kingdom. In return, you secured an exclusive trade contract with their textile guild. The emperor never found out. Or maybe he did. He nodded politely when you mentioned it at dinner. There's a fringe tidbit here, tucked beneath Rome's polished surface. Some senators kept shadow clients, not official dependents, but foreign merchants, local criminals, or rogue ex-legionaries they funded quietly, outside the formal patronage system. These unofficial ties could prove more useful than any official ally, especially when discretion mattered more than decorum. But this dance isn't all smooth. Once, you were nearly caught bribing a judge. Your courier fumbled the handoff, and for days, rumors swirled. You spent a fortune on hush money, threw an emergency banquet to distract the gossips, and commissioned a statue of Mars to celebrate military virtue. It worked. The rumors faded. The judge retired mysteriously wealthy. Still, the risks are real. A misstep in this world can end your career, or worse. Political enemies don't just argue. They ruin. They dig up debts, investigate your slaves, accuse your relatives. One rival senator once claimed you faked your ancestry. You crushed him not with insults, but with a sudden property audit from your well-placed friend in the censor's office. He backed off. You bought a new villa. And as your network grows, so does your reach. A man owes you a favor in every guild. You can bend the price of bricks, nudge magistrates into favorable rulings, and even delay a law you don't like. Not by shouting in the Senate, but by reminding 3 key men that their careers are rented, not owned. You pause now, standing on the steps of the Curia Julia, watching the crowd pass below. You nod to an equestrian whose son you helped enroll in rhetoric school. You catch the eye of a praetor whose cousin owes you 20,000 sesterces. And then you look up, to the rostrum, where someday, your son might stand, delivering speeches gilded with your silent support. In Rome, social clout isn't a side effect of wealth. It is the wealth. Real influence isn't counted in coins. It's counted in names that answer when you call. And when your name carries that kind of weight, even the gods start listening. You step into the atrium of a domus where the walls shimmer with imported glass tiles, and the floor beneath your sandals is a mosaic, tiny colored stones arranged to show Neptune wrestling a sea monster. It's so detailed, you swear the waves move. Welcome to the realm where wealth stops pretending to be subtle. This is where Rome's richest flex, and you're here to perfect the ancient art of showing off. Tonight, you're attending a dinner party. Not just any dinner party, a scene thrown by one of your oldest rivals, a man so rich he has a bronze doorknob shaped like his own face. You pass the threshold, greeted by incense thicker than reason. The scent. Arabian frankincense, of course. The host casually mentions it was delivered by camel and courier. You nod politely, calculating just how much he spent to make your own myrrh-scented entryway feel like a public latrine. Rome's elite aren't content with being wealthy. They need you to know they're wealthy. They need to crush your self-worth with gold cutlery and Egyptian lapis lazuli napkin rings. The dinner itself, a multi-course spectacle of culinary insecurity, dormice stuffed with pine nuts, peacock eggs dyed blue with indigo, jellyfish in vinegar aspic, because even the grossest food tastes better when it's expensive. Your turn is next week. So, naturally, you've ordered Spanish wine fermented in silver urns. You've hired a Syrian flute ensemble. You've even trained your parrot to greet guests by name, though so far, it mostly just shouts filthy pleb at the steward. You're not just feeding people, you're performing wealth. Every dish, every statue, every imported fig is part of a silent contest that never ends. The goal? Make others feel like their abundance is merely comfortable compared to your divine level of ridiculous opulence. Even your fountain is a flex. It's not just for cooling the air, it's for awe. You had it installed in the garden courtyard, rigged with hidden clay pipes and a bronze lion head that spits water with suspiciously rhythmic force. Guests love it. Your neighbor hates it. You're winning. Let's talk fashion. You wear a toga woven so finely it's practically translucent in sunlight. Totally inappropriate. Absolutely enviable. A few years ago, the Senate tried to pass modesty laws on excessive luxury. You wore a purple-trimmed tunic to the vote. Just enough to show support for tradition, just flashy enough to say, come on, we all do it. Fashion is currency. A senator's daughter wearing too many pearls? Social suicide. But just the right amount of pearls, especially if imported from India and acquired through a shady Alexandria trader? That's genius. You once spent a month's rent on a belt clasp shaped like Bacchus's face. Why? Because it made a merchant's wife cry with envy at a dinner. Worth it. Even your slaves are status symbols. You've trained yours to speak in elegant Greek, quote Plato, and offer wine with one hand while adjusting the candlelight with the other. A fellow guest once asked, "Is that a man or a chandelier?" You smiled. Both. The domus itself? Not just architecture. It's a billboard. Your atrium ceiling? Painted with stars and flying gods. Your floor? Black and white tiles arranged in optical illusions. Guests walk cautiously, unsure whether they're falling or standing. You paid extra for that. Confusion is expensive. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some elite Romans installed tiny rotating display platforms in their atria, upon which they place prized objects, vases, busts, even luxury fruits, just to spin slowly during parties.
Were they necessary? Absolutely not. Were they mesmerizing? Completely. You're already planning one. And then there's art.
Statues, frescoes, imported figurines. You own a bronze Aphrodite so detailed it caused a minor scandal when someone described it as visibly cold.
You pretended to be offended, then had a heated atrium installed. The statue stayed.
Every object, every guest interaction, every drop of perfume in the air is a performance.
Not for gods. Not for family.
But for your peers, the ones who nod politely while secretly inventorying your wealth like petty museum curators.
It's exhausting. It's addictive.
You even host a monthly philosophy dinner, a light veneer of intellect over 10 courses of ego. Guests recline on imported Syrian couches while a hired stoic mumbles about detachment and temperance.
No one listens.
They're too busy marveling at your honey-glazed songbirds on lemon-scented skewers. Historians still argue whether Roman luxury was a cultural rot or a calculated flex. Some say it led to decline, others believe it held the elite together in one endless, gilded standoff. Either way, the evidence is in your calendar. You have 3 dinner invitations, 2 mosaic workshops, and a pearl polishing appointment this week alone. And it's not just other aristocrats who are watching. Your clients, those plebs and freedmen who depend on your favor, see every statue, every dinner guest, every exotic fruit in your bowl. To them, your luxury isn't just indulgent. It's aspirational, strategic, proof that you belong at the top. And oh, how expensive it is to stay there. Once, you skipped just one banquet. Rumors started that you were in debt, that you were sick, that you'd gone mad and joined a Pythagorean commune. All because you didn't serve flaming oysters that week. So you hosted an emergency feast. Roasted whole boar, dancers from Hispania, a surprise poetry duel. You even gave guests engraved bronze toothpicks. Just a little something, you said. They pretended not to notice. But they noticed. And the whispers stopped. Now you recline in your triclinium, watching candlelight dance across the gold-threaded tapestry of your dining couch. Outside, Rome murmurs and rustles. Inside, everything glows. You've already commissioned next week's centerpiece, a trained parrot in a miniature chariot, pulled by mice in leather harnesses.
Too much?
Maybe. But this isn't about subtlety. It's about winning the long game of appearance. Because in Rome, the richest man isn't the one with the most. He's the one whose wealth makes you feel like you've never truly eaten grapes. You find yourself standing just off the Via Appia, your sandals coated in dust, your hair perfectly arranged despite the breeze. You're not alone. Behind every curtain, in every shaded corner of this wealthy district, eyes are watching. But not all of them belong to men. Tonight, we trail the slippered footsteps of those often left out of Rome's stories, the women of wealth, quietly reshaping empires from their atriums. Because here's the truth, Roman women couldn't vote, hold public office, or command legions. But money, influence, oh, they played those games like seasoned generals, only with silk, subtlety, and social judo. You arrive at the domus of Julia, widow of a once powerful consul. Since his passing, she's doubled her property portfolio, hosted senators at candlelit poetry readings, and made 3 consecutive praetors owe her favors they won't talk about. Her secret? Inheritance, investment, and knowing exactly when to stay silent. You sip spiced wine as she gestures toward a polished wooden table. On it lie wax tablets, rolled deeds, even a small stylus made of ivory. These are her weapons. She manages estates across Campania, rents out warehouses in Ostia, and once turned a bankrupt villa into a luxury boarding house for visiting elites. It's not philanthropy, it's passive income, Roman edition. Women like Julia work within the cracks of the legal system. Technically, a woman needed a male guardian for big transactions, tutela mulierum and all that. But by the imperial period, loopholes bloomed like oleanders. Wealthy women found guardians who signed whatever they were told to, or even filed paperwork through loyal freedmen. Historians still argue whether Roman law ever truly restricted rich women, or if society just quietly accepted their control, as long as it came draped in enough modesty and pearls. You stroll with Julia through her inner courtyard, where vines climb the columns and laughter spills from an adjoining room. There, you glimpse her daughter, Lavinia, playing dice with a young senator's nephew. Julia nods approvingly. "A good match," she murmurs. But she's not thinking about love. She's calculating dowry leverage, future alliances, property access. Marriage in Rome? Oh, it's financial strategy in wedding garlands. Wealthy women inherited not just trinkets, but full estates. A well-placed marriage could merge vineyards, relocate a rival, or even buy influence in a neighboring town. The best part? After divorce or widowhood, which happened often, a woman usually kept her own property. And some made a career out of that revolving door. Take Cecilia Metella. Yes, that's Cecilia. Married into a powerful family, divorced quietly, and went on to become one of Rome's wealthiest women. She built a tomb so grand it made nearby aristocrats complain about view obstruction. That's power, Tombstone edition. And not all women operated from behind silk curtains. Some made their names publicly, like Eumacia, a wealthy cloth merchant in Pompeii who funded an entire building for the Fullers Guild. Was she just generous? Or did she own shares in half the laundries in town and use the building as a brand temple? No one's saying, but her statue still stands tall while others crumbled in ash. Others, like Plancia Magna in Perge, Anatolia, had civic titles and public acclaim. She funded fountains, basilicas, and ceremonies, and her name was carved into stone beside gods and emperors. Quiet power, please. She wore it like a brooch. You return to Julia's garden as the night deepens. She lights a lamp with her own hand, not because she lacks slaves, but because she wants control of the moment. "We are not weak," she says softly. "We are the architects." Then she grins. "We just let them believe they built the domus." That's not to say it was all freedom and silk. Wealthy Roman women still lived under the shadow of gossip, legal limitations, and patriarchal performance. A woman who acted too boldly might be called immodesta, shameless. Too rich? Suspicious. Too independent? Dangerous. But clever women learned the dance. Praise the gods. Attend festivals. Drop hints, not orders. Smile sweetly while buying the whole street. You visit one such street in Trastevere. Behind unassuming shopfronts lies a shipping business run by a woman named Flavia. On paper, it's her son's operation. In reality, she negotiates with traders, smooths tariffs, and keeps one eye on the Tiber for incoming cargoes. Her ledgers are cleaner than most temples. There's a fringe tidbit. Some elite Roman women believed certain amulets or moon rituals could influence financial luck. One papyrus even describes a charm involving snake skin and pomegranate juice meant to bind wealth to the home. Superstition meets investment planning. Hedge funds, but make it magical. You can't ignore the role of slaves and staff, of course. Behind every powerful woman stood dozens of aides, scribes, body servants, and stewards. Many of them freedwomen loyal enough to guard secrets and clever enough to run entire estates. They weren't just accessories, they were extensions of their mistress's reach. And then there's legacy. A man might build monuments. A woman builds alliances. Julia's granddaughter already has a dowry more complex than a consular budget. Her niece is engaged to a provincial governor's heir. Her name is whispered in temple corridors, not with fear, but with calculation. You recline now, in the guest room of Julia's villa. The sheets are linen. The ceiling flickers with lamplight reflected in polished bronze. Outside, you hear the splash of her fountain. Inside, you realize, the empire isn't just ruled by senators and emperors. It's shaped by women who host salons instead of assemblies, wield influence over dinner instead of decrees, and turn gold rings into golden traps. Because in Rome, money talks, but sometimes, it whispers in a woman's voice. You awaken to the smell of burnt herbs and honey, drifting up from a brazier in the corner of the room. A servant tiptoes past you, muttering a chant that sounds suspiciously improvised. Welcome to a different kind of Roman economy, one where fortunes are guarded not just with locks and ledgers, but with spells, omens, and enough good luck charms to fill a museum gift shop. You're entering the mystical accounts department of the elite, where magic meets money. You step into a courtyard where the morning light glints off dozens of tiny metal pendants. They hang from the necks of slaves, from hooks in doorways, even from the branches of a sacred laurel tree. Phalluses with wings, miniature fists, tiny hands flashing strange gestures. It's not an avant-garde jewelry line. These are fascina, powerful amulets to ward off the malocchio, or evil eye. Because when you're rich in Rome, you're also a walking target. One senator you know carries a knotted thread in his toga hem, dyed red and twisted under a full moon. Another won't step into the Senate house unless his left sandal is strapped first, an old superstition he insists saved him from bankruptcy. Historians still argue whether such rituals were sincere belief or just high society habit, like carrying an emotional support goat. Either way, you'd be surprised how often fate is blamed for a failed business deal in Rome. Tonight, you're invited to a gathering, not a party, but a consultation. The host, a former quester now turned full-time mystic. His atrium is filled with wax tablets, sacrificial incense, and a very smug astrologer from Alexandria. The room hushes as charts are unrolled, stars plotted, and a birth time is requested. You pretend not to notice that it's all slightly off, but your host hangs on every word, especially when the astrologer suggests delaying a key real estate deal by 3 days to avoid Saturn's disapproval. Rich Romans don't just consult professionals, they sponsor them. You know a textile magnate who keeps a full-time seer on payroll. She's paid in both coin and exotic fruit. In return, she decides auspicious days for shipments, favorable trade routes, and even how many bolts of fabric to dye each month. Once, she warned him not to buy Egyptian linen during a solar eclipse. He ignored her. The shipment burned en route. The next day, he built her a private shrine. Some millionaires go even further. One grain merchant imported black market scrolls from the East promising wealth incantations. He read them aloud in a cave while wearing nothing but a sheep's wool cape and clutching a quartz egg. Did it work? He now owns 2 bathhouses. Coincidence? Maybe. Or quartz. You visit a domus that's quiet. Too quiet. The lady of the house, wealthy and sharp, has recently lost several key shipments. Bad omens, they say. She's hired a haruspeks, a priest who reads omens from animal livers. The ritual involves a bleating lamb, a bronze knife, and a lot of murmuring. Eventually, the priest declares that Mercury is displeased and demands a marble statue. 2 weeks later, a new trade deal lands. Mercury, appeased, apparently likes being flattered in stone. There's a fringe detail most Romans won't admit: underground spellcasters, mostly women, mostly enslaved or freed, who specialize in depictions, lead curse tablets. For a price, they'll inscribe a rival's name, fold it with hair or nail clippings, and bury it in a graveyard or throw it into a well. One rich widow swears her neighbor's bakery burned down 3 days after she left such a tablet. She also bought his land cheap the week after. And let's not forget the gods themselves. A statue of Fortuna, the goddess of luck, stands in nearly every elite Roman home. Not out of piety, but as insurance. You offer her garlands, maybe sprinkle a few coins in her altar bowl. If things go well, she gets a marble upgrade. If they don't, you quietly replace her with a more cooperative deity. Success is fickle. So are gods. Some wealthy Romans build entire private shrines, lauraria, not just for household gods, but for imported ones too. Isian cults, Mithraic chambers, even Eastern mystery rites have found footholds in the homes of those desperate for an edge. If it smells like incense and promises good harvests or extra cargo, someone's invested. One merchant you know worships Serapis, the hybrid Greco-Egyptian god. Every trade deal is sealed with a muttered prayer to him. His warehouse even has a hidden chamber where workers place offerings. Wine, dates, tiny scrolls requesting safe voyages. You once spotted a golden ring there, likely tossed in after a close call at sea. Business and belief, twined like ivy. Of course, not all mystical methods are so subtle. Some elites host full-blown nocturni, nighttime rituals involving dancing, chanting, and copious wine, meant to clear the air before major business ventures. You attended one where guests were blindfolded and made to drink something called the Tears of the Moon. You're still not sure what it was, but you dreamed of dancing goats for 2 days. Even the emperor isn't immune. You've heard rumors, carefully whispered, that he keeps astrologers close, sacrifices for success, and never signs a law on a Wednesday. Too risky. Mercury's day. You recline now in your own tablinum, where a tiny statue of Mercury smiles from the shelf. A charm hangs from your neck, bone, not gold, carved with symbols you don't fully understand. You've never buried a cursed tablet yourself, but you know a guy. You light a cone of frankincense just in case. Not because you're superstitious, of course. Just cautious. Because in Rome, fortune isn't just found in amphorae or tax receipts. Sometimes, it's hiding in goat entrails, muttered verses, and a well-timed prayer under the right moon. And if you want to stay rich, you might want to keep a lucky charm or two. You wake to the sound of silk rustling. Not birdsong or temple bells, just silk. That soft, greedy whisper that signals someone, somewhere, has more than you. And that they know it. Rome's richest have a problem, and it isn't supply chains or taxes. It's addiction, to luxury, to one-upmanship, and to the endless, exhausting performance of being richer than rich. You tug on your tunic, woven from fine Alexandrian cotton, then pause. The senator next door just bought 3 new outfits dyed in Tyrian purple. Real stuff, harvested from sea snails, stinking and rare. So of course, you need to upgrade. Again. You're not just dressing. You're fighting a silent war of fabrics. Wealth in Rome isn't about having enough. It's about having more than them. And that hunger never sleeps. A few years ago, an equestrian built a gold leaf ceiling for his dining room. Gold. Leaf. Ceiling. Within weeks, 2 senators followed suit, one of whom added a rotating star map above his atrium for good measure. To honor the cosmos, he claimed. It cost more than a legion's pay. This is how it starts. You install heated floors. Your neighbor installs a private snow room, keeps slaves lugging fresh ice from the mountains. You host a feast with exotic birds. She serves imported jellyfish on silver shells. And so the spiral deepens, until you're both eating peacock-tongues and wondering why everything still tastes vaguely like insecurity. Historians still argue whether this cultural arms race of luxury hastened Rome's downfall or simply reflected its success. But living in it, you just feel tired. Drenched in cinnamon oil, yes, but also tired. Even funerals became exercises in opulence. One millionaire staged his own pre-death party, lying on a couch while guests gave toasts, pretending he'd already passed. He wanted to enjoy the praise before dying. Another spent a fortune commissioning his likeness in over 30 statues, one for each of his villas. He died penniless but famous. Sort of. At the Forum, you overhear a group of wealthy men comparing their fish ponds. Not the fish, just the ponds. One brags about how his mullets respond to a clapping pattern. Another claims he trained his to recognize his shadow. Someone else is breeding eels with blue spots. These aren't hobbies, they're financial mating displays. You've seen men grow anxious over the shape of their doorways. Round arches? Too provincial. Square lintels? Last decade. So now you're interviewing architects who specialize in post-Augustan minimalism. It's just less marble, but costs more. Naturally. Then there's the cult of body image. Baths are no longer just baths. They're social performance arenas. You once saw a man spend 2 hours exfoliating his elbows. Not his whole body. Just the elbows. When asked why, he replied, "It's where people look when you recline." Even your pets aren't safe. A senator's wife imported a Persian cat and had it trained to sit on command during symposiums. The next week, someone else imported a pair of tame panthers, leashed with gold chains, for a garden party. One peed in a fountain. The guests clapped anyway. Of course, the anxious chase for more isn't limited to physical stuff. Titles matter. You've seen men brag about the obscure priesthoods they've bought into, pontifex of obscure harvest rites, keeper of the sacred turnip festival, etc. All ceremonial. All expensive. All ridiculous. But they wear those titles like armor. Here's a quirky little detail. Some aristocrats commission philosophers, not for wisdom, but for branding. Having your own philosopher follow you around, muttering insights and quoting Plato, that's next level flex. Bonus points if he's balding and tragic looking. Makes you seem deep. And then there's the competition over who doesn't care. One elite friend claims he's above it all. Lives simply. Just me, my books, and a bit of good oil. You visit his simple home. The books are gilded, the oil imported from Spain, and his personal reader recites Virgil with a voice trained in Alexandria's theatres. Humble. Indeed. This class anxiety infects everything. One day you're confident. The next, someone arrives at dinner with gold-threaded sandals, and suddenly your pearls feel small. You lie awake wondering whether your atrium tiles are provincial chic or just provincial. You commission new ones, just in case. You even start doubting your own friends. Are they here because they like you, or because your triclinium has imported Syrian cushions? You overhear someone call you comfortable, not wealthy. It stings more than you'd like to admit. So you double down. New goblets. New rugs. A table carved from a single piece of African cedar, which smells like old wine and ambition. You're not just showing off anymore. You're insulating yourself from irrelevance. Because in Rome, slipping down the social ladder isn't just embarrassing, it's erasure. There's a saying whispered at the baths, better to die poor than be seen dressing like one. It's dramatic, but you nod when you hear it. You've seen what happens to those who fall from grace, land sold off quietly, clients abandoning them like rats from a leaking trireme, even old friends forgetting to extend invitations. Even your dreams aren't safe. You dream of being outbid at an auction, of showing up to a party in last year's sandals, of someone publicly calling your mosaic provincial. You wake sweating. Then you hire a new mosaicist. And yet, you sometimes miss silence. A moment where everything isn't performance. Where your worth doesn't hinge on the thread count of your tunic or the price per drop of your bath oil. But Rome doesn't do silence. It does spectacle. And you've bought front row seats. You lie back now, staring at the Corford ceiling of your bedroom. It's carved with scenes from Homer, gilded in places you can't even see from the bed. Outside, a musician plays a soft tune on a lyre you commissioned from Athens. You don't even remember why. You've won the game. You have more than most, and enough to impress nearly anyone. But the truth. The game never ends. Not here. Because in Rome, wealth isn't a number. It's a shadow you chase across the marble, always just out of reach, whispering, "Is it enough?" You step into the city's busiest necropolis, where tombstones cluster like a small marble forest, their inscriptions fading under centuries of wind and dust. But these aren't ordinary graves. They're monuments to Rome's richest, each one screaming status even in death. Because if you think wealth stops at life's edge, you haven't met a Roman millionaire's funeral. Funerals in Rome are shows of power, theatre where the departed's family plays lead roles. You're invited to one such procession, a spectacle so elaborate it seems like a parade for the gods themselves. The streets are jammed with mourners, musicians, actors dressed as ancestors, and slaves carrying gold urns that glint like stolen stars. You smell incense, roasting meats, and the faintest hint of expensive wine spilled over marble steps. It's not just about honoring the dead. It's about showing that your family's legacy is untouchable, etched in stone, preserved in public memory, and fortified with every denarius that flowed through your estates. You watch the procession wind toward the forum, where a specially commissioned orator steps forward. His voice booms, reciting the virtues of the deceased, every achievement amplified, every flaw omitted. The crowd listens, but you know many are more interested in the sumptuous funeral feast that follows, where roasted boars, stuffed dormice, and honey cakes flow freely. Even the gladiators hired for the event seem like extras in a movie about power. Historians still argue whether these ostentatious funerals drained the Roman elite or reinforced their grip on society. Either way, you sense the message is clear. Death is not the end of status, it's the final performance. The ashes don't just get tossed into a hole. They are sealed in marble urns, often placed in family tombs visible from the road, like billboards proclaiming, "We were here. We mattered." One of your contemporaries commissioned a columbarium so vast it included a chapel, a garden, and a statue garden. His descendants visit annually to renew vows and stake their claim on the neighborhood. Some millionaires went further, investing in ghost investments, buying plots not just for themselves but for generations. Their tombs became city landmarks, maintained by endowments that funded priests to perform regular rites. It was a kind of immortality purchased with cold coin and warm hearts. One curious detail: some families hired professional mourners, women who would wail and faint on cue, heightening the drama. The louder the lament, the greater the respect. You once attended a funeral where the chief mourner carried a silver mirror, supposedly to reflect the deceased's soul back to the living, a poetic but pricey superstition. You glimpse a small altar, where a recently deceased senator's family has left offerings of wine and bread. Nearby, a brass plaque lists the man's accomplishments: consul, legate, patron of the arts, and hints at wealth so vast it funded several legions and multiple provinces. You realize that wealth didn't just buy power in life, it guaranteed echoes in eternity. Sometimes, the dead became political tools. Families used funerals to display their continuing influence, inviting senators, generals, and even the emperor's representatives. The guest list alone was a statement. One infamous funeral lasted days, featuring theatrical reenactments of battles the deceased had fought and speeches from prominent orators who subtly campaigned for the family's future power. And then there are the absurdities. One magnate spent a fortune commissioning a life-sized bronze statue of himself, fully armored, holding a scroll listing his business ventures. It was placed in his tomb's entrance, a sort of welcome mat for eternity. Guests reportedly debated whether it was bravery or vanity. You step back now, away from the crowds and noise, to the quiet of a columbarium corridor. The air is cooler here, heavy with incense and old stone. You pause before an urn inscribed with the words, "Wealth fades, but memory endures." It's both a comfort and a warning. Because in Rome, even death is a stage, and the richest know that legacies are bought, not given. Marble, gold, spectacle, these are their tickets to immortality. But as you look around, you wonder, does the dead man's name still carry power, or is it just an echo of coin and ambition? You walk away slowly, the sun dipping below the city's skyline. Behind you, the city continues its endless dance of wealth and power, life and death, shadow and light. The streets you know so well will someday hold your own story, whispered among the marble urns. And as night falls, you realize the oldest secret of all. Wealth may buy many things, but it can't buy the silence of the grave. Now, as the city's bustle fades, and you settle beneath soft blankets, the scent of old stone and distant sea lingers in your mind. You've wandered through gardens of gold, sailed on seas of wine, whispered with gods and ghosts, and traced the lives of those who lived and died, wrapped in Rome's relentless pursuit of wealth. Rest easy knowing that even the richest, with all their power and glory, were once just people like you, searching for meaning, comfort, and a place in the endless story. Their mosaics may crack, their coins may tarnish, but their echoes ripple still, in every stone, every story, every quiet night. So breathe deeply now, let the night cradle you like a velvet toga, and let the soft hum of history carry you gently to sleep. Tomorrow, the world waits, bright, new, and full of possibilities. But tonight, you dream in marble halls and fragrant gardens, knowing that some stories never truly end. Sleep well.